Well, good morning. If you are here for the West Coast Chambers workshop on inclusive leadership, you have come to the right place. So welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. I am Carolyn Monahan, and I am pleased to be here today with Daryl Shelton. Before we begin, I want to give a big thank you to our sponsors that help us make these programs possible. This program is a great DEI program, and it's also a leadership program. So you're getting two great pieces of information today and on two different planes. And so we do want to give a thank you to both our DEI mission development sponsors and our leadership mission development sponsors. They really help us make these critical workshops available to you. This brings me to introducing Daryl Shelton. So he's a professional facilitator and with Davenport University. He's an experienced facilitator and teacher with expertise in sales, leadership training, high-level creative thinking, and curriculum development. So he's a dynamic speaker who's engaging the participants and challenging them to think in new ways. So he might call on you today. He does love working with cohorts to help them grow and implement new strategies in their daily lives. And we are thrilled to have him here today to talk with us about inclusive leadership. So I'm now going to turn this over to Daryl Shelton. Good morning.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. An absolute pleasure, man. I'm kind of been waiting for this day, being a part of this wonderful world that we live in Michigan, where today it's 70 degrees, tomorrow it's 40 degrees. Who knows what happens? But at the end of the day, I am just excited about the fact that many of you have taken this conversation that seems to have just really taken a fire, which is just, it warms my heart. It warms my heart because this has been a personal journey for me. When I was 7 years old, I went to a small school that was struggling and dealing with issues in the area of diversity and inclusion. And I can remember one of my classmates having a problem, and my father driving me to school and meeting with the principal about that concern. At that point, I realized that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it is not about what we do internally, it is about what we do externally. It is about the commitment that we make as individuals. I knew at that moment that my dad was doing that not because he needed to, but because he felt it was important, even though it wasn't even his child where the concerns lied. And so with that, today we're going to go through several components, and sometimes I'm going to go fast and sometimes I'm going to go slow. That becomes kind of the hyperness of me when it comes to it. And so if I see the faces and a bit of confusion, I will slow down a bit. And feel free to ask questions. We would ask that you ask those questions in the chat box and we will get to them right away. And as Carolyn talked about, I may call on you. And so I am a professor as well. And so the teacher in me always feels like there is an opportunity to engage people. And so don't feel like I'm picking on you like you're in 4th or 5th grade. It is just an opportunity to grab your attention and get you involved. And so let's get started. When we talk about this conversation of diversity and inclusion, we're really talking about an opportunity in many respects to really move people from just having conversation, but to leadership. But we have to start that by talking about diversity and really kind of the bottom line. That is why many of you are here today. I like to start to talk about this concept of unconscious biases and barriers, because too often I have found that there is a large commitment to the concept of diversity. There's a large commitment to the concept of inclusion. But what the reality speaks to us is that there's an unconscious bias that goes on with individuals that they're not even aware of. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some workplace conversations and strategies as well. And so in the chat box, I'm going to ask all of you, take just a second. How would you define diversity? Not how would you Google diversity, but how would you define diversity? You know, that's that teacher in me again, is that I ask students that and they immediately Google and give me the answer. So please, personally, how would you define diversity? Pop that in the chat box and we'll start to kind of discuss some of the components that you guys have laid out. Some wonderful stuff, a melting pot, individuals, thoughts, all of humanity, representation, differences, a variety of experiences, beliefs, backgrounds, visible looks. I'm seeing some great stuff. People of various social, economic, ethnic, religious backgrounds, a spectrum of different backgrounds within itself, differences between people. A lot of great stuff that is happening when it comes to your definition. This is a huge piece, not only just for you at work, but also personally, because we get engaged in these conversations and people start to bring up diversity. And I'm all about worldview in the sense of what is your perspective when it comes to it, because that actually helps lead the conversation in a more positive, in a more respectful way by defining it. So continue with that, but then I'm going to ask you one more question before we go to a definition that I have laid out. I want to know from you, what makes you diverse? Too often I get into these conversations and individuals segment it based upon groups of people. I'm a believer that all of us have a component of diversity. And so I'm going to ask you to do something that's going to make you vulnerable right now. What makes you diverse? Could be just a one line, one component, but I'm going to ask you now, as you moved from your definition to move into the statement that makes you diverse. Love that, Jason, my experiences. Becky, I am unique. Mary, I'm a divergent thinker. Ooh, love that. My past, from Chip. My lens on how I see my life. Oh, that is just, man, oh man, our lenses are so much into. Elizabeth talks about her gender, her life experiences, and her passions. Deb is a one of a kind, and I love that because in diversity, we really believe we must move to be uniquely. How do we, in many respects, help individuals become uniquely who they are? Too often, whether it be our circles at home or at work, we are almost mimicking someone else. How are you unique? Rick talks about God's creation. Just so many pieces that are here. And I think that this is an important piece for you, that when you get involved in this conversation, that you own that with pride. Because once again, it helps then move individuals to have conversation with you. If your diversity is about one segment group, those individuals, in many respects, some of them will feel very uncomfortable. They will feel like that they are the only one that has to speak. They will feel like that maybe there is a part of this that really has nothing to do with anyone else. When you open your world to this, I am diverse as well, it means that you are included in the conversation and you're a part of it. And that ownership really takes you to a whole nother level of respect with the individuals. Once again, thank you guys so much. I'm looking at these comments and I'm just absolutely loving what I'm seeing with a lot of pride. When we talk about the concept of diversity, we're talking about, in some respects, these three statements. And so if it is all right, I am going to go back to that teacher in me. And so Jody, I'd love to know how to pronounce your last name, but I-M-M-I-N-K. Could you read the three components that are listed there and also provide me with an opportunity to make sure to pronounce your last name correctly?
Sure, it's Imink.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And for the group, can you read what I've got listed there for defining this concept of what I have as inclusion?
Sure, the act of valuing and including people and groups to participate in activities, decisions, and opportunities. Inclusion respects the diversity of voices and the perspectives of giving equal consideration to the contributions and talents of the people in the organization. When you see world inclusion, we want you to think about creating a sense of belonging.
Thank you so much. Think about that. Think about those three components. Think about what you wrote. This conversation is much larger than often we are hearing and we are seeing it. I think that we need to start to put it at that particular level. I think it starts to open the eyes of the individuals. If you have individuals within your circle that have a tendency to say that, well, this isn't really about me, the reality is, it is about them. The reality is even more that it's about them is that the relationship between the definitions that are listed there and what you have defined gives you a chance to make sure that they become engaged in the conversation. I'll give you three examples. Think about third grade. Actually, I'm going to take you to sixth grade, middle school. Most people in my education world, when they say middle school, there becomes a bit of a frown that's there, because that's probably one of the toughest areas when it comes to instruction. But I want you to go back to middle school. I want you to go back to middle school and the circles that you felt like you wanted to be a part of. I want you to think back at those individuals that were sitting outside that circle, from one classroom to the next, to one event to the next, to one party to the next. Think about that sixth grader that did not feel included. And I want you then to take that into the workspace. Think about that employee that does not feel included, that their voice feels like that it's never heard, that they feel that when they are sitting in meetings, even though they want to raise their hand, they know that other people will be called on. They know that when they provide an advice for something, I'm going to even push this element to even further. Think about that new individual that came to your school in sixth grade that looked, talked, and maybe even acted different than everyone else. How included did they feel? When I start to have these types of conversations in my circles, there is a different attitude and behavior to start to bring people in, to help people, this light bulb comes on to many of the individuals to say, I get it now, let's talk. And that is my goal. My goal is to help people to walk into that world, to get them and to get into that conversation, because without that, you really at times will have roadblocks. I want you to define equity now, because we talk often about inclusion and diversity, but the reality is we really kind of don't talk about this concept of equity. And so in the chat box, once again, if you could type that information in, gives us an opportunity to also be able to kind of review what others have said, have defined, and I also believe this is an important piece as well. Many of you come to some type of different work facility, organization, whatever field it may be. But I think that it starts with you defining components. Megan writes, providing each individual what they need in order to succeed. Absolutely love that. Linda talks about comparable status. Susan talks about level playing field, fair, impartial from Kyle, removing roadblocks from Elizabeth. All of this just absolutely amazing. So when you start these conversations of diversity, inclusion, and equity, think about what the definition can do to help you open the door to the conversation. That door then moves you to a whole nother level of what needs to be done. And we're going to skip a couple of slides, and I want to thank you for those great comments. Actually, let me go back here a second here, if I might, because I do need to give, oops, let me go back here. So sorry about that. The teacher and me, I do need to give you this piece. My slides are a little bit slower than I wanted them to be, so sorry. There we go. Susan, if it's all right, if you could turn your microphone on and if you could read the concept of defining equity, please.
Yeah. Equity is the freedom from bias or favoritism. To achieve equity in the workplace, organizations must work to eliminate policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce differential outcomes by any aspect of a person's identity. Ultimately, organizations should strive to create an atmosphere that is fair for all.
Thank you so much. Pleasure meeting you as well. The reason we do definitions I talked about before is making sure to help start off the conversation. The reason I had actually, there's not even just the teacher in me of having you read it out loud, but I don't know about you. For me to think about something, for me to write it, and then for me to say it, takes it on a whole different level. And so part of this has to do with providing you with some tools as you walk into these conversations with individuals that you will have. Because once you say it out loud for some of the learners, it actually starts to hit a whole different level of their level of understanding of importance when it comes to it. This conversation of diversity, inclusion, and equity is extremely important. And if you believe in all of that and you embrace all of that, my question is are you ready to become an inclusive leader? We've had a lot of conversations over the year. I think the conversation needs to move to this world of inclusive leadership. And what does it take and what does it mean to be an inclusive leader? And so here's where we will start. There are 6 characteristics that has been studied and reviewed on the quintessential, what I call the utopia of inclusive leadership. And so Elizabeth, is it Brubaker? If you could read those 6 for us, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Visible commitment, humility, awareness of bias, curiosity about others, cultural intelligence, and effective collaboration.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. A pleasure meeting you as well. 6 pieces that are there. So when you think about developing your program, positioning your organization, you've adopted this diversity, equity, and inclusion program. We believe that inclusive leadership is needed. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about people that are at the top level of your company as viewed by others. I'm talking about inclusive leadership is anyone that decides this is something I'm going to champion. Meaning that if you have an employee that has decided that this is an important subject matter to me, this is an area I would like to work on, I would highly recommend. Matter of fact, if you are developing a program, I would recommend that you have individuals at every level. I think collaboration and conversation doesn't just happen. People talk about at the top and it trickles down. The reality is that I have found in my circles that when my peers commit and dedicate to something, it has a lot more effect than those that supervise me. And so I'm asking many of you that if this is something that you're interested in, it'd be one that you give the opportunity for all individuals to be involved in that. And so what do we mean by these components? Here's this first one. And Jason, if you could please, Jason, if you could read this first, visible commitment. And that's Jason Singledecker. Is that correct?
Yep, Shingledecker.
Yeah, love that name.
So visible commitment. They articulate authentic commitment to diversity, challenge the status quo, hold others accountable, and make diversity and inclusion a personal priority.
I don't know about you, but 4 years ago when I read this statement, it was like a brick. It was like, wow. I mean, you think about that, articulate authentic commitment. I'm going to ask you folks in the chat, when you think of articulate authentic commitment in this conversation, what does that mean? How do you feel when it comes to that statement? Please, in the chat, give us some thoughts and reflections when it comes to it, because that alone became the start of me really deciding I've been doing some things, but man, this is asking me to do something at a whole different level. Elizabeth writes, making myself vulnerable. Ugh, yes. Vanessa, I feel brave. Shauna talks about being able to speak your thoughts and feelings about diversity and commitment to it. You guys, this is just, I'm being honest with you. I'm getting goosebumps reading the information that you guys are listing here. I mean, because when you think about that, I don't know, I picture things. I think about being at work and people that make either comments or statements or things that are happening. This visible commitment means that I, as an individual within that company, is committing that when this happens, I am going to make an authentic commitment to speak up and to hold people accountable. That's huge. Think about within your company. What if 1/3, what if 1/4, what if 1/8 of the employees that were there had a visible commitment? You want to talk about change? I teach marketing at Grand Valley, and it's quite interesting as I talk about the concepts of that. But I think that change happens usually when it has to do with individuals that are involved and engaged. And we talk about the concepts of how people have influence, consumer behavior of influence. And I said, I am sure that most of you pretty much wore the same jeans when you were all in 8th grade. And they just kind of looked at me and I said, it's pretty much a guarantee. It's middle school. You want to be able to fit in. Think about your company. If 1/8, 1/4 of your employees had a visible commitment, think about how much that would drive this conversation of inclusiveness. Thanks for those great comments, you guys. Here's this next one. And so in this next one, I'm going to ask if it's all right. I'm going to have Linda, is it Kaiser? Linda, if you could please read humility.
Okay. Just a moment. I'm missing. They are modest about capabilities, admit mistakes, and create the space for others to contribute.
So sorry about that, Elizabeth. Very nice job. Humility. Wow. I know that probably many of you are in leadership positions. So let's take that one step. Let's take the next step when we start to talk about diversity and inclusion. Having to have humility. Think about the power that that does with the rest of the people that you're around. That you, in essence, can admit mistakes and create a space for others to contribute, meaning that you're having conversation, which I've done often, and someone calls me out. I did a session about 2 weeks ago with a group of individual leaders, and I made a statement of, and this has to do with the 60-year-old man, me, I made the statement of kids. So, and I said it in reference to young employees. And I had an employee come to me and said, that really bothered me when you said that. You put me in a stereotype group that I was just a kid, that I didn't have as much knowledge. That's how it made me feel. I was committed when we got together yesterday to the whole group to apologize and said, I shouldn't have made that statement. That a statement can be so offensive to the individuals because we have really, in many respects, especially when you talk about this new generation of employees that you have coming to your space. Humility is huge. When people find humility, they find that they actually can lower their wall and start to have more and more conversations. I'm going to move on to, and I'm going to have, if it's all right, let's see here. And so in my space of individuals that are out there, I always like to diversify. So Rick Arnold, if you could turn your microphone on, Rick, if it's all right. And if you could read the awareness of bias.
They show awareness of personal blind spots as well as flaws in the system and work hard to ensure a meritocracy.
Thank you so much for that, Rick. Appreciate it. The awareness of bias. There are blind spots that are out there that individuals, and we'll talk about in just a couple seconds, in that unconscious bias concept of it. If you're an inclusive leader, you have that awareness. We're going to talk about the systems of how do you become aware of that. And then as I will discuss, based upon what is an emotional intelligence, i.e. EQ, what you can do about that. Beth Hamilton, if you could read the curiosity about others.
Sorry, my headset wasn't on. Curiosity about others. They demonstrate an open mindset and deep curiosity about others, listen without judgment, and seek with empathy to understand those around them.
Thank you so much, Beth. And Beth, did I pronounce your last name correctly? I'm so sorry.
Yes, I believe you did. Yep.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you so much
you.
for reading that. Curiosity about others. This is an area that I have had a lot of conversation in the last 6 months with individuals that have said to me, would love to learn more, Daryl, but I'm a little bit nervous about asking particular questions. I have said to them that if you really are interested and committed to inclusive leadership, it really has to do with them telling their story. building a relationship with them. And then once that happens, you listen without judgment. That, I just want to pause for a second. Think about that component of what that does to an individual, especially an individual that might be different than everyone else. That you listen without judgment and then seek with empathy to understand those that are around them. Meaning that a comment, a statement, a conversation, whatever the case may be, happens. And the relationship that you have built puts you in a position to really kind of listen to what they have to say, their opinions, their thoughts, their reflections, and there's no judgment that's with that. And then you seek an empathy to understand those that are around them. I think that's just such an important part of this piece. Here's this next one. And so Jetty, I believe, is it Waylon? Jetty, if you could read this cultural intelligence, please. Well, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to, if it's all right, Tanya, and Tanya, if you could read the cultural intelligence for the group, I'd appreciate it. And by the way, I love your background, Tanya.
Thank you. Sure, cultural intelligence. They are attentive to others' cultures and adapt as required.
Think about that. Thank you so much for that. They're attentive to others' cultures, which means that instead of staying within your space, as we do often. I talk about my time at Grand Valley, and it's so interesting is that once students come to class, it's almost without saying, they will sit in the exact same seat every single week, which I find fascinating. So there are, of course, being the obnoxious professor that I am, I then will mix up the seats one day. And then as students come in, I ask them to sit in different seats. And then you can just see the confusion on their face. I'm asking you during this cultural intelligence, they are attentive to other cultures, meaning that what space are you in right now? Are you in the same space when it comes to work? Do you spend time with the same people? Do you lean and ask advice of the same individuals? Or do you welcome other people from different cultures and backgrounds and components to your space? Meaning, are you moving around the room? Because if you're not, it's hard to be attentive to other cultures and adapt because you have not learned. I'm asking you to get out of your comfort zone here to learn about others that gives you the opportunity to have that cultural intelligence. And then effective collaboration. And so I believe, is it Shauna Carlson? Is that correct? If you could read that for us, please.
Thank you. The effective collaboration is they empower others, pay attention to diversity of thinking and psychological safety, and focus on team cohesion.
Thank you so much for that. Here is probably the most powerful one. They pay attention to diversity of thinking. Last time you had a staff meeting, who talked? Did the same two people talk? That individual that you have that usually doesn't say much of anything, how much do they feel included in the circle? I think about companies that are making movements right now, and Google's one of them, where 26% of every single idea that they have comes from their employees, meaning the implementation of the programs and services by one of the most successful companies in our world is happening because they have included others at the table. Are you including others? Because it's effective collaboration. I'm telling you right now, some of you, this is probably the most powerful. I am seeing individuals from different diversity backgrounds and the rest that are hiring individuals, which gets me excited. My concern is, just because you hired me does not mean that I'm sold. What gets me sold is, do I feel like I'm included and do I feel like I belong? Meaning, are you including them in the conversation? I'll give you one last example here on this part, is that I was a part of a group, and because of this wonderful world of COVID, everything was virtual and everything was online, and emails were flying about this particular program that we were working on. And what I found to be interesting is that the people that spent the most time together, that liked each other, that hung out with each other, were constantly complimenting each other on the emails and the work that was being done. I know some of you may think that that is simple, that that is small. I am telling you, it is huge. Think about an idea or thought that you might have that might be a little bit different, and you pop that out in an email and you wait for the thread of the individuals. It's like some of the obsessions that we have in social media of the likes and the rest of it, and you get none. But we have a wonderful person like Carolyn who pops that out, and everyone is clicking the likes and how wonderful it is and how great it is. That is small, but it is not. I can tell you, Carolyn at that moment will feel extremely included. Individuals that do not will feel like, do I belong here? Should I even stick around? Do they even value what I bring to the table? And so in conclusion with this part, these are the 6 characteristics of inclusive leadership. The question that I have that follows this is, if you're looking for a synopsis of top traits, it really is leaders who have an awareness of biases, who display humility and have a genuine empathy, truly become those that we recognize as an inclusive leader. I want you to think about where you work. I want you to think about yourself and ask yourself those 3 components. I'm going to actually ask you to even think about going backwards of those 6 traits that we had on there. What is the one that you really would like to work on when you think about your value that you add to inclusive leadership? So in the chat component, if you're uncomfortable in answering this question, I get it. But describe the level of inclusive leadership at your organization. I have that for the folks at the chamber when it comes to it. But I think that you're not only just at the chamber, but also your involvement within your organization. What is really the level? Would you say it's low? Would you say it's moderate? You said high. We've given you the 6 components. How would you rate that world? Take a couple seconds, pop that in the chat box if you like. I can understand that if there might be some uncomfortableness with that, but would love to see some conversation regarding that. And many of what I'm seeing gives me hope. Hope in the sense that many of you are putting at least moderate that's there. The area of low is an area of concern, but that concern is just an opportunity to me. Opportunity in essence, that how can we do, or what can you do to help your organization move that needle? So what is your biggest challenge in improving an inclusive mindset in your role or your organization? I know there's been quite a bit of typing by me, but I think that I am a believer that when we learn, we actually take the time in listening and typing to actually help us really think this through. This is one I want you to take a couple seconds. What is the biggest challenge in improving an inclusive mindset in your role? Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. Becky? Yeah, really appreciate it. Those of you that are out there, I'm just really asking you to think about this question. You made the decision to come to be a part of this today. What's some of the biggest challenges that you're dealing with? Love what Robin wrote, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. So much that's there, so much work that needs to be done. The reason that is these 2 pieces. There is 2 concepts in the world of bias. There is an explicit bias and an unconscious bias. The explicit bias talks about the feelings, the attitudes, or the association made toward a person, group of people, idea, or thing. It can be both positive and it can be negative, but we're conscious of that and we are aware of our explicit biases. Think about that. I've got some examples that are up there. When you talk about the concept of the Detroit Lions versus the Packers, without any question, people have a pride and they wear it on their sleeves. Well, let's talk about this in the world of diversity and inclusion. There are some biases that you have with individuals that are out there that without any question come across. We talk about that Coke and that Pepsi. Boy, you bring up these subject matters and people immediately, they provide their perspective. What concerns me is for some explicit biases, they're happening in circles, in pockets of individuals, because they're afraid to say it as a group. But the explicit biases are there. If you're looking for a low-hanging fruit of where to start as an inclusive leader, it's right here. Individuals that have that explicit bias and have no problem with it, and actually for your workspace and your worldview, it's negative, I would ask that you take some steps based upon the inclusive leader part that we talked about. But let's talk about this one, the unconscious bias. Feelings, attitudes, or association made toward a person, group of people, idea, or thing. Very similar. Can be positive or negative, the same also as the explicit. Here's where there's a change. They're less aware of how the human brain categorizes people, things, ideas, because they are unaware of it. An unconscious bias can contradict your core values and beliefs. This is the area we focus on. The reason we focus on that, because we have individuals that within our space that say that I don't have a problem with this group of people, but they're the same individuals that do nothing to make a difference. They hear comments, they make statements that are there. They actually even go as far as saying, thinking in their core values and beliefs that they are a very inclusive person. But the track record doesn't show that. The comments do not support that. The support is not there. This is probably the most difficult, because when an individual has an unconscious bias, it is difficult to make them move. It is like anything else. It's admitting. When you confront someone about a particular situation, and the reality is they can't admit it. Part of it, I believe, has to do with the approach. And that's where we move to emotional intelligence. And so if it's all right, I believe it's Jake Stockman. Jake, if you could read the definition that we have listed for emotional intelligence, I would appreciate that. Oh. Yeah, that microphone's, yep, not working. I believe is it Jason Shoup? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic, Jason.
Emotional intelligence, the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically, from the Oxford Dictionary.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And so sorry for that, Jake. Would have loved to have heard your voice when it comes to being a part of it, but we'll catch you next time. I love this definition. This definition really kind of helps you with that unconscious bias person. It's helping them become aware, control, and express their emotions in a way that really helps them to move and understand and work with other and individually in a way that helps their diversity and inclusion. Because emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor their own and others' feelings and emotion, and then be able to discriminate among them and use that information to help kind of their thinking and their actions. That's what we do with emotional intelligence. We help individuals understand, okay, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? And how does that affect other people? Think about individuals that you have personally or professionally. Matter of fact, I'm going to throw out this one statement that really does bother me as I move from one company to the next. They will come in and talk to me about conflict management with an individual, and then I'll get to a particular employee and they will say, well, you know what? That's just Daryl. You know, that's just Daryl. That's how he is. I gotta say, folks, that doesn't fly in 2021. That will put you and your worldview and your company in a really bad position. And here's more importantly, I want to help Daryl out. I don't work with people I don't care about. I work with people I really care about, which means that my commitment to help them, especially in this subject matter, has to do with helping them understand the ability to monitor their feelings and really start to ask them really important questions about why do you think that way? Why did you say what you said? Do you know how that affects others? I think emotional intelligence become a key factor as we run down this road to help this conversation of diversity and inclusion. It's actually making a commitment as an individual with those that you care about within your circle. Because once you do this, this is a train that could move so much faster. But the longer you allow that coworker, that peer, that friend, that person that you care about to allow their emotional intelligence to become out of control, not only do you hurt them in this subject matter, but you hurt them in their long journey. One of my huge fans is Daniel Goldman, who I had a chance to meet about 3 years ago. I'm almost a stalker in some respects because I've gone to 3 of his sessions and I'm on his website all the time. But he wrote this book, and I got to tell you, if you read it, it's absolutely incredible. He talks about the emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, for managing emotions in ourselves and our relationships. That's what emotional intelligence really is. And in saying that, he had these 4 competencies, which he feels is important. Taking people from self-awareness to emotionally understand. I throw out that question. Emotionally self-awareness to understand, meaning that when someone says we need to hire someone that is different than us, what does that do to you emotionally? Does your blood pressure start to rise? Do you start to question it without even saying anything? There's some emotional awareness that you need to help people with when it comes to this path. And it has to be aware, because once they become aware, like many things, they can move on to self-management. That self-management has to do with self-control, meaning that I'm going to stop making those statements. I'm going to stop questioning that particular component because I have no data to support me questioning it. I'm only saying it because emotionally, maybe I had one bad experience, or maybe I don't believe 100% like everyone else does. Then there becomes adaptability. You moved over to achievement orientation and then a positive outlook. You're helping individuals become self-aware and then self-manage a piece that I think is important to them, especially if they care about other individuals. We then move over to social awareness, where they hopefully move to empathy, meaning that I have listened to this person's stories. I've listened to their opinion. I've listened to individuals that have knew to walk into them, do not walk, talk, look anything like me. And I can empathize because I built a relationship with them. And then I become aware of my organization. That's when that individual, the blossom of the flower, starts to move. They look around at the organization and say, boy, I don't know. I think we need to do something, not just me. I've worked on me. Now it's time for the organization. And so then you move to relationship management, which means that they have influence. They start to coach. They deal with conflict in such an amazing way. There becomes teamwork, and hopefully they move to an inspirational leader. This emotional intelligence, I think for many of you, become an opportunity to help with this conversation of diversity and inclusive leadership. As you can tell from my passion, as I have to hyper down now a little bit, that I really love this subject matter. But I've given you a lot to think about, a lot to feed on when it comes to it. And so being the teacher in me, I look at my watch that says 10:45. And so I do want to open it up for questions, comments, and thoughts that you folks might have. And so whether you have that in the chat, or I'm going to go rogue right now. Even if you want to just open up your microphone and ask a question, please. I just want to continue this conversation. We've got 15 more minutes here at least, so 14 now, but let's do this.
So you talked earlier about a level of inclusion, like a certain person feels very included at that point. And it just struck me when you said that there are people who are used to being very included. So even if that would be notched down a little bit, they would feel like they're not included. Or there's people who have become comfortable with completely not being included. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's the actual level and then the level of what you feel. How do you account for that?
I want to take this in two parts. I think one is that I account for that for the simple fact that too often it actually goes back to us in the school world and what we've done in a poor sense in education, where we have focused on students that are a particular grade level or a particular subject matter experts, and then not included other individuals that were within that classroom, which means that that individual has a past history of not feeling included. And so when this happens, they have a tendency, like many of us, we pick up behaviors and habits, and it's hard to shake those. It's really difficult for that person to shake those. I think as inclusive leaders, it's important for us to make a commitment to actually be a part of that. I'm running staff meetings now where I want to talk, I actually time myself. I talk less than anyone else that's in my circle. I'm tired of hearing myself. My people really do the work. I might be the pretty figurehead, and that pretty is really underlined in a really bad way, but the reality is those individuals really are the ones that actually have the value. And so if they don't speak out, it might be a conversation where afterwards where I grab them and say, hey, Daniel, didn't hear your thoughts. Man, I'd love to have you share some next time. Do you have something that you can include when it comes to these particular conversations? And continue that with Daniel to make sure that Daniel at some point feels that level of comfort, and then have conversation with Daniel a little bit about, because once again, this diversity conversation and understanding people has to do with learning about also his past. Because I want to be careful that he doesn't get himself in a situation where he gets damaged, and that's that safety part. I want to make sure that Daniel, and sorry, Daniel Martin, for picking on you right now, but I want you to feel safe when those things happen. I think that's one part of it. I think the other part of it has to do with making sure that we set a tone with the whole group, that this movement is the change that we are doing as our company, as our organization, letting people know before time so the other individuals do not feel offended. I was one of those, I actually was one of those kids that once I finally got out of my real shyness, then you couldn't shut off me. I mean, it was like a water faucet. And so I needed someone that really could help me understand and navigate that maybe I was being a little bit too much when it comes to going back to that emotional intelligence, helping me navigate. And so hopefully, did that answer your question that you asked? And I won't be offended if it didn't. I really want to make sure that when folks ask questions, that I really kind of get to the heart of what they were looking for.
Yes, I mean, you did.
Other questions that are out there?
Getting back to, I think it was the traits, and one of the things stated was, learning or being someone that listens without judgment. So that's hard. Just inherently, you already have something you're thinking about. Any tips on how to be a better listener without judgment?
Yeah, I love that you bring that up, because I'm a lover of DISC, and one of the areas that I learned in my DISC that was my issue, that I'm an anticipator. I like to anticipate what you're going to say next, almost to the point where I was almost a lion, that Carolyn would be asking me a question and she would get 5 words into it, and my mind mentally was going super fast, and I was just waiting almost to the tip of my tongue as if I was on a race. And then when Carolyn was done, boom. 2 things. One is that old mentor told me that. He said, Bite your tongue, Daryl, and count to 5 before you respond to anyone. Number 2, as someone's talking, ask permission to write some components down. And instead of what you're thinking about, your first thing is to go to the points that they discussed, which will change you in the sense that you mentally can't do 2 things at one time, meaning you can't be thinking or be frustrated if you are really paying attention. And Carolyn makes that statement, and I'm saying she was bothered by the fact that I said she was late to work, but she really wasn't late to work when it comes to it. So I'm writing these things down. I'm listening to them. And then I'm repeating it, making sure that I heard those correctly, and then I talk about it. And then I get my chance to talk about the questions and the concerns that I have. That's just one suggestion that I have. I have others as well of what you've got to do. Too often also, and I got to include this part, I just got to go there, and that has to do with at some point in the journey, because I can relate to what you're talking about, and I don't know if this is exactly this, but I have biases of certain employees that I work with. And I know that the minute they go knock on my door, immediately I'm like, Lord, someone please call, someone call me right now, someone email me, because I don't want to have this conversation. And I have to say to myself, almost like I'm a little bit, you know what, Daryl, stop. Carolyn brings value to this company. Why is it that it was all right that when Shauna came to your office, you were all right and you welcomed her in and you even chit-chatted for 10 or 15 more minutes? But Carolyn knocks on your door and you have an attitude. And I had to stop myself and go through this list. 1, why do I have an attitude to Carolyn? What has happened in our history? And I started going through those information pieces. And then at a point, I actually had a meeting with Carolyn. I said, hey, I want to talk to you about some things that I have that's there, that I want to knock out of the biases and stereotypes that are there, that I have, that's affecting our relationship. I had to be vulnerable enough to go there. And I'll tell you, this has happened with 3 employees, and it has made a world of a difference. Because they have said, you know, I've noticed that when you knock on my door, you don't. I can see the emotion in your face, Daryl. I can see you not looking at your watch on your hand, but you're kind of looking at your watch when it comes to it. They are aware of those things. And I think at some point in that journey, you need to pay attention and listen better, but you also need to have conversation with them to try to find out what is the core component that actually put that relationship at the point where you didn't want to have that type of relationship or that type of respect for each other. So I'm hoping, I'm sorry, I went a little bit longer than the question that you asked, but did that answer your particular question?
Yes, thank you. That was very good.
Thank you. Another question that's out there. Come on, you guys. I was telling those guys before time, I said, now don't be my students that they know that 11 o'clock is around the world. So they're looking at each other saying, don't ask another question, because that means that we might be a little bit late. We do have 6 more minutes. And I love this subject matter. So any other questions that might be out there, feel free, even in the chat component. I don't know if I'm missing one that's there. I would love to talk a little bit more about that.
I have one.
Yeah.
Thinking about how you would approach, you know, you're trying to engage the team and get everyone sort of on board with this. How do you approach or educate people who are maybe not really getting it, not understanding?
Yeah.
Or resisting even?
Okay, yes, I like that. I think it starts off with providing them with a world that they can relate to. Meaning that what is it about this, in all honesty, that is stopping you to want to get on, as folks have used in the business world, get on the bus? And in that description, giving them the freedom and the safety to be able to say the things that they feel. Here's another area that we've done a very poor job in the last 5 years. We don't put people in safe spaces where they feel like they can be honest about how they really feel about this, how afraid, the fears that they have when it comes to it. And so I think it starts off with that, Carolyn. I think it moves to, let's talk about, which I end my presentation with, the what if and the what next. Meaning that if someone brings up something of, why should we consider hiring someone that's different than us? Then it becomes the what if. What if we do? What if we don't? And that really has, for me, has opened up a whole nother world, because the what ifs in the positive side seem to just fly out. The what if not becomes the area of, oh, is this just me? And I think then individuals start to get it. And it goes back to that emotional intelligence in the sense of, wow, Daniel and Jake and Shauna and Tanya don't feel that way. I'm the only person that feels that way. Yeah. I either have to get on the bus or I have to get off the bus at this point. But I think that that safety part is the most important piece, is that I think we do live in a world where people do not feel safe either way. I think people that come to settings that in a diversity inclusion that feel uncomfortable do not feel safe being authentically who they are. And I think that people that care about the subject matter still have a curiosity world, but they're feeling unsafe to be able to say or ask questions. And I think that we have to stop all of that and open the door and break down that wall. Any last questions at all that you might have? Oh, Carolyn, you're on mute right now.
I think what we just discussed is something that's similar to a question that's in the chat about starting this conversation in places where people don't really recognize.
Yeah, I think that it starts off with a strategy and a plan. That's step one. You have to have a strategy and a plan of why you're doing what you're doing. Number two, you have to have commitment. Commitment that this isn't going to be something we just do. I mean, at the end of the day, if I were to ask all of you to raise your hands on how many of you have been to a diversity inclusion training besides this one, I think probably everyone would raise their hand. But it's interesting how this subject matter is now again, and it's because we should have never stopped. And so I think that organizations and companies need to make a commitment. I would go as far as saying that when I am looking for a leader, inclusive leadership is on my list. It's on my list. I mean, I've done the research and the studies. I'll tell you right now, this new group of individuals that are coming to your workplace, they expect this. And when they don't see this, they don't feel this, they don't feel a part of this, I will tell you, they will probably go to a company that they feel that is. I have had too many organizations that have had to change how they do business in many cultural aspects because they're losing employees because they can't get them, even though their salary and their opportunities in a financial sense are so much more. It's because other people are looking for inclusive environments where it is. And so I think it's the first two. And then I think number three is then bringing everyone together to say, where do we start? So I think it's those three parts, Carolyn, and the individual that was in the chat of where you need to start when it comes to that conversation. I had someone ask me the question yesterday, well, should we hire an inclusive consultant? And now this is a little insulting for my profession. And I'm concerned with people that just do that from day one. I want you to do that work before time. I want to know where are you, where you would like to be. And my fourth piece of that is a climate survey. I think that you need a very honest climate survey about where are people when it comes to the subject matter, because you have no idea where to start or how people feel. And I think that you need to hear from your employees.
Wow. Great advice. This has been wonderful. I'm afraid we have to end now. We've hit 11 o'clock already. Time really flew for that. But I just want to thank you so much, Daryl. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure there's more questions, so we might be sending some more your way. So once again, I want to thank you for joining us this morning, and have a great day.